Can I be completely honest with you? When I first started teaching, classroom management wasn't my forte. You see, when I graduated with my master's degree, I was 21 at the time and I looked extremely young. And I was told multiple times that my students would have a hard time taking me seriously because I was so young. So the advice I was given was to not smile until December because that way my students would respect me if I ran my classroom with an iron fist. And the truth was, that just didn't really feel aligned with me. So, along my way, I started to realize some valuable pieces of information and motivation. And so today I'm going to be sharing the top 5 pieces of classroom management motivation I needed to hear as someone who struggled with managing a classroom when I first started teaching. So, with that being said, let's dive in. Now, I talked about a little bit about how I struggled as a teacher managing a classroom, but let me kind of explain to you where my classroom is now. Now, how I like to run my classroom is I definitely do not smile until December. That's just not who I am as a teacher. Instead, I lean into who I am and I lean into my strengths to help me manage a classroom and to help build strong relationships with my students. I have students now who are sixth graders who still like to reach out and check in on me. I have students who say that I'm super fun and engaging while still helping them learn. And I've even been asked in years past to help train substitutes for our district. But the point is, classroom management is a lot easier now. I don't necessarily have to think about it a majority of the time. When my students transition from one activity to another, oftentimes they do so without saying a word and without me saying anything because I like to use music and fun and games to transition from one activity to another. I also designate or like to give one of my students the job of being the teacher's assistant, so they help run some of the transitions in my classroom. All that to say, the path from where I was now or where I was to where I am now is extremely different. And here are some pieces of advice I wish I would have heard along the way that I feel like would have helped me get to where I am a lot quicker. And the first one is your worth as a teacher is not measured by your students' behavior. Now, in years past, I've had everything from mild disruptive behavior, as far as like talking when I'm talking or out of their seat, to extreme disruptive behavior, such as starting fist fights in class. I had a student who would smear feces in class, and I've had all sorts of extreme behaviors. And so, as far as that goes, when you're dealing with those kind of students or those students who need that extra support in class, it can be really easy to put the blame on yourself. And it's kind of like this unwritten rule that the school has, or it feels like there is, that if the students aren't behaving, it's a reflection on you as a teacher. But the truth of the matter is, that's not the truth. You can have extremely amazing classroom management skills, and you just have a couple students who really need that extra support and some needs that aren't being met yet. And that has no reflection on you as a teacher. In my teaching career, I've seen some of the absolute most amazing teachers with extremely good classroom management skills really struggle with a couple students in their class. And one thing I always try to remind them is it has no reflection on them. It's simply that student needs the extra support. And I'm sure, as I very much know you, you are working to get that support for that student, but it doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. Instead, it's really important to remind yourself that your worth is not measured by behavior your students decide to partake in. You can't make them choose to make good decisions. Sure, you can set them up with the environment, the skills, the tools, etc., to set them up for success to make the right choice, but you can't at the end of the day make them decide to follow the expectations and procedures. Again, you can support them, you can't make them. So, with all that being said, if you feel like you have a couple students that you just cannot for the life of you reach, and that you're a bad teacher because of it, let this be your reminder that you are not a bad teacher. It's okay to not be able to reach and have really strong relationships with every student. I mean, think about it. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of other teachers online who are sharing their stories, and you're not listening to all of them, you're listening to a couple that you feel aligned with. The same goes for our students. They're going to find a couple of mentors in their lives that they really click with, but they're not always going to click with all of them. And that doesn't mean the other teachers are bad. It just means that everybody has different personalities and different preferences. So again, if you find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with extreme disruptive behavior, or your students are having a hard time following expectations, make sure to take a step back and separate your worth and your identity as a teacher. Remind yourself, I am a good teacher. I do my best, and my best is enough. My worth is not measured by how my students decide to act today or behave today. I am worthy. I am a good teacher. My worth is enough and cannot be taken away. My worth as a teacher has already been determined, and I am worthy of being a teacher. I am not a bad teacher because I have a couple students who are struggling. That has everything to do with them and helping support them, and it has nothing to do with me and my identity. The second area that I wish I would have gotten a piece of advice from was that everyone started where you are right now. Now, this was very common when I first started teaching. I would see other teachers in the hallway or even online who seemed natural experts at managing a classroom, and I constantly asked myself, what am I missing? How come I'm not where they're at? There must be something wrong with me. But the truth of the matter is, there's nothing wrong with you. And in fact, oftentimes the teachers you see, at least online and at least at my schools, that are really good at classroom management, if you actually take the time to speak with them, oftentimes the people that are experts because they struggled really bad. They had a really hard time with managing a classroom. So remind yourself that the teacher next door wasn't just naturally born great at classroom management. I mean, there are definitely some who have a really strong classroom management skills, but the only difference between you and them is they've had more years to figure out what works for them. And they started exactly where you are now. So instead of looking at the teachers online or the teacher next door and comparing yourself to where you are not yet, use that as inspiration of where you get to go. Remind yourself they started where I was, and look how far they went. And if it's possible for them, it's possible for me too. I can think of not only my story, but I can think of another classroom management expert I had online. Her name's Gina from Teaching with Heart. She was a guest here on The Present Teacher, and she shared how she actually struggled with classroom management when she started. And now it is something she's an expert at. In fact, she's teaching thousands of teachers around the world how to have a really good classroom management skills. So with all that being said, remember, they started where I'm at. I'm exactly where I need to be. There is nothing wrong with me. I get to get better and better. Every day it gets better and better. It gets easier and easier. There's nothing wrong with where I am at now. I am enough. I am doing enough. I will get there. I will continue to take desired action. I will continue to do what I want to do, and it will get me closer to running and managing a classroom in a way that feels aligned with me. The third piece of advice that I wish I would have gotten was to follow your values. And I kind of just talked about this, but when I first started teaching, I listened to everybody else's opinion but my own. And if I'm being 100% transparent, that's probably because I wasn't very confident in myself and I didn't trust my own intuition. I thought to myself, I'm a first year teacher. I'm a new teacher. What do I know? I'm going to go listen to the experts. And while, yes, listening and taking inspiration from experts is a great thing, instead of asking myself first, how does this feel with me? Does this feel aligned to me? I would just try anything and everything that I found online to try to get my students to listen and follow directions and stay in their seats. And I didn't have to repeat directions 4 or 5 times. But the truth of the matter was, I was trying all these strategies, and it took me years to finally figure out what worked for me. But if I had just taken the time to actually listen to myself and my own intuition, I probably would have gotten there a lot faster. So, what are your values? Your values are the kind of teacher you want to be and that you are becoming. A great way to figure out your values is to think of other teachers that you really liked and what kind of values they might have. And then also think of some teachers that you may have had that you didn't connect with or, see eye to eye with, and what values did they articulate or have, and what is the opposite of that. So, some examples mine are authenticity. I believe in being authentically yourself because I feel like as a teacher, if I'm authentically who I am, whether it's online, in life, or in the classroom, my students will feel open and safe to do the same. So, along with authenticity, I highly believe in positivity. I try really hard to be positive in everything I do in life, but especially in the classroom because I feel like it's important to create a safe and positive environment for my students to be at. That way, they know if they need to go to me for anything, especially outside of school, that I will always be there for them. And to also kind of shift their mindset in the classroom, a lot of my students come from certain generational trauma. And it's really important for me to create, again, that safe, positive environment for them so that in the future, they might shift into a growth mindset and it might help them in the future years to come. Another value of mine is to be calm. Now, one thing about me growing up, whenever someone even slightly raised their voice, I would cry. I was extremely sensitive and I could really feel the emotions of others. That's why for me, it's really important that I remain calm in the classroom. So, this looks like me not raising my voice to get my students' attention, but instead to get quiet. Instead of yelling out the directions, I make sure to maintain a work voice level throughout the day. And I'm not saying that we don't get wild and crazy and have fun every once in a while, but it just helps me be the teacher that I was meant to be and show up as my best self. The other value I have is inclusivity, create a culturally inclusive environment. I am ESL endorsed, and I believe in creating a safe environment for all cultures to come together. So that's something I also resonate with. So take some time to think about what are your values. And as you scroll things like TikTok and social media, take some time to ask yourself, does this strategy align with your values? An example of this that I didn't listen to when I started was everybody in my building, or practically everybody at my school, was using clip charts. Now, clip charts, if you're not familiar with them, students clip up or down depending on their behavior and choices throughout the school day. And while this may work for some, this felt completely not in alignment with who I was. It didn't align with that positivity piece that I had as a value. And I was really struggling with my classroom management because I had strategies like this woven into my classroom management plan that didn't align with me. So instead, I pivoted my classroom management plan and strategies to be more positive. So instead, I adopted some of the practices from whole brain teaching. Now I celebrate when my students continuously make good choices and I gamify that, as opposed to pointing out publicly when they make a disruptive behavior or choose to be disruptive and then have them have to work harder the rest of the day to catch up because of that. I don't want to tie their worth as a student based on their behavior. I want them to recognize before they become disruptive and what their triggers are so they can calm and pick an opposite behavior of choice to do But I digress. So that's an example. And if you take some time to list out some of your values, you'll really start to catch on to which of your values feels great and which strategies feel great based off of your values and which doesn't. And a way this shows up for me is if I feel like, oh my goodness, that's a great idea. I want to try this, then I'll go ahead and do it. And most likely, if I look at it closely, that aligns with my values. However, if I get told a piece of advice, like I really need to try this, and it feels kind of like, ugh, I guess I can try it that way. I don't really want to, but I will because I have to. Then most likely that's not going to work for me and my values. So, with all that being said, take some time to really trust yourself. You are your own expert. You know what's best for you, and things that work for you aren't going to work for someone else, and vice versa. Things that work for other people may not work for you, and that's okay. Like I said earlier, the only difference between you and an experienced teacher is that they've had more time to figure out what works best for them. So, kind of switch your mindset to this is more of an experiment, and you get to piece together different things that work best for you. So, as a reminder, remind yourself that there is nothing wrong with me. I follow my desires. I trust myself. I trust my intuition. I am being guided. I am being led. I do what's best for me. I know what's best for me and my students. I have my students' best interests at heart. I am an expert. I am an expert. I trust myself. I believe in myself. I decide to follow my values when it comes to what I implement in the classroom. The fourth piece of advice I wish I would have gotten when it comes to managing a classroom is that it gets easier and it gets to be fun. So, as I talked about in the beginning, when I first started teaching, I really struggled. I had students that were always talking when I was talking. I had students constantly out of their seats asking what we were doing. They were constantly off task, and I couldn't figure out what was going on until I started to realize maybe I should start listening to what feels best for me and figuring out what works best for me in my classroom and stop tying how things are going as my worth as a teacher. And the more I did that, the more easier it got. And the crazy thing is back in the day, I used to heat up my coffee like 20 times to finally drink it hot. But now, when you actually get to a place that feels great to you, it's automatic. So now what I do is I actually use a lot of songs to transition my students from one thing to another. So oftentimes I'm not saying anything at all. And I have multiple models throughout the classroom on what students will need so that, again, I don't have to say anything. My students know exactly what the expectations are. We go through the procedures and expectations consistently, and it kind of transitions into this flow where everything just goes automatically. And even when someone chooses to partake in disruptive behavior, you already have your steps laid out ahead of time on how you're going to mediate the situation to a point where they get back on track or you're on your behavior plan or whatever it is, and it feels natural. You're not second guessing every single thing and trying a bunch of things. You already know what works best for you, and you can kind of just sit back and teach. And when you have that room, that space to just sit back and breathe into it, it feels fun. Then that's where I have that space to be that bubbly, fun, and engaging teacher that I just naturally am with my students. I can be the teacher I'm naturally meant to be because there's such strong classroom management foundations there. So, with all that being said, it becomes automatic, and this is something I talk about deeper, not only for the classroom management system, but other systems as well, is how do you automate your classroom management? And so I want to remind you that when you get to this place, it is possible for managing a classroom to be easy. It is possible for managing a classroom to be fun. And if I am capable of doing it, I know you definitely are too, because I'm definitely not like the smartest or, genius teacher in the world. I'm just an average teacher. So if I can do it, you can too. So remind yourself that managing a classroom gets to be easy. Teaching a classroom gets to be easy. It gets to be fun. If you decide that managing a classroom is going to be hard for you forever, then what you will find often is managing a classroom is then hard. Whereas if you look for ways to think, how can I see this differently? How can I make things easier on myself, on my students? How can things run more smoothly? Then you are transitioning yourself into making classroom management easy. So ask yourself, how can I make this easy? How can I make this fun? How can I make this simple? How can I look at this differently? So remind yourself that teaching gets to be easy. Managing a classroom gets to be easy. Navigating disruptive behavior gets to be easy, and it gets to be simple, and it doesn't have to, tear my energy down or relate to my identity as a teacher or anything like that. It gets to be easy. It gets to be fun. I trust myself as a classroom management expert. I trust myself. I picture the days where managing a classroom is easy, and those days are mine, and they're coming to me closer and closer. And every single day, I choose to take desired action. I decide to listen to my values and make decisions that feel good to me to get me closer to those days. The last piece of advice that I wish I would have gotten, especially as someone who struggled with classroom management, is that when you are your best, your students will be too. Oh, this one hits home really hard, because I honestly believe if you're not a parent yet, I feel like teaching is a great segue into being a parent, because you really have to work on yourself, and the kids are great at kind of giving you in full face on pieces of yourself that you really want to work on. And so what I found was that when my students would partake in disruptive behavior, I would feel a tightness in my chest, and I would feel the need to snap at them, whether that was with a remark, whether that was raising my voice, whether that was getting frustrated, and, whatever it was. I'm not saying that's right, but I started to notice that, and I started to notice these different triggers in my classroom that my students would do. So an example of this is, I cannot handle when there's a bunch of kids putting their hands in your face. There's something about it that just makes me, ugh, I can't do it. I feel like the walls are closing in on me. So what I used to do is I used to raise my voice, like, sit down. I told you to sit down, and stuff like that. And it was just an emotional reaction. It was a trigger at that point, and that was my reaction to it. But then I started to ask myself and dive deeper, what is causing this trigger and why is that? And I started to realize I have a sensory issue with things being in my face. So then I started to work on that in the classroom, and this looks like recognizing the trigger. So, but I would vocalize this to my kids, especially my primary friends. And I'd be like, okay, Miss Haynes is feeling triggered because there's 4 or 5 students with their face in my face and their hands in my face. So could everybody please sit down while I take a couple breaths? And then I would do rainbow breaths, heart to home, whatever it was, dragon breaths, windmill breaths, whatever it is, rainbow breaths. And I would practice, and I would show them in the moment what it looked like to then, you know, regulate my emotions. And then I'd apologize and say, I'm sorry, I need to set a boundary where I cannot have students coming out of their desk to come talk to me. I want to show up really excited for you, but I can't do that if you do that, because my emotions are telling me that I want to yell, and I need to calm my body first. So what can we do instead? Next time, can you please raise your hand, and when I am available, and I'm happy to come look at what you want to show me or whatever. And just modeling to my students what that process looked like. And the amazing thing is, these students would then replicate what I did, and they would do it later in the classroom when they were feeling dysregulated, because I had articulated what that looked like and showed up in my body, and they would do the same, and they would calm their bodies. And then even better is, these students would then go out to recess and do the same thing and help their friends regulate their emotions. And before I knew it, I had teachers ask me what was going on, and I told them about, my sensory things. So working on yourself, the whole point of this, working on yourself helps your students work on them and be better for them too. I noticed that when I was working all the time and I was the first car there and the last one to leave, my ability to regulate my emotions in the classroom was getting, you know, I had less capacity for that. I was, emotionally snappy, and I didn't want to be that way for my students. So instead, I really had to work on my boundaries and who I was and regulating myself and showing up for myself. Because when I did that, I was then able to show up in the moment for my students. Because you've probably heard me say this before. The reason I call myself or created this community called the Present Teacher is because I want to help you show up in the moment for your students without your to-do list, without all the emotions, here right now in the moment with your students, so that you can make the best impact that you are capable of being, and you can be that teacher that you know you are capable of being. And teaching then gets to be fun, it gets to be joyful, it gets to be impactful. You get to love your life in the classroom and out of the classroom, and that's really the whole point of it all. So with all that being said, when you are your best self, your students will be too. So take this time. I want to invite you as a reminder that I am worthy of feeling good. I am worthy of living a life I desire. When I am my best, I show up my best for my students. When I work on myself, my students then get to work on themselves and take the skills that I am learning and implement in their lives. The better it gets, the better it gets, the easier it gets, the easier it gets. I am worthy. I am showing up as my best every day. I am showing up for myself every day. My best is enough for my students. My best is enough for me. So that wraps up the 5 pieces of classroom management motivation I needed to hear as someone who is struggling with managing a classroom. If you want to take this a step further, I have a ton of content in regards to classroom management and what I particularly use in the classroom. So feel free to check that out. And if you loved hearing from me, make sure to subscribe and like or leave a review. I would really appreciate it because it helps me reach more teachers that need to hear this kind of content. Second place I want to send you to is if you want to dive deeper into classroom management, I want to recommend that you download the Classroom Management Guide. It answers the top 10 questions I get in regards to managing a classroom, plus I link to additional podcast episodes and YouTube videos. That way you can reference those and you don't have to go searching through all my content. I'm at over 100 episodes now, so you can just find them easily depending on what topic you want me to cover on. The third area I want to invite you to is we are doing a 15-day classroom management challenge. Now, this is something completely new and I'm so incredibly excited for it. I started to reflect and notice that a lot of the teachers I was working with, they had a strong first couple of years of teaching, but they really felt like their classroom management was lacking, or that they really wanted to work on it over the summer. And they really wanted to be able to navigate disruptive behavior and start the next year off strong. So that's why we created the 15-day classroom management challenge. Essentially what it is every single day you'll get a prompt that will help you eventually create your classroom management plan. That way on the first week of school, you can show up with confidence that you can manage a classroom and navigate disruptive behavior without not feeling like frozen, like a deer in the headlights, not sure what to do. So there will be 15 days, 1 prompt each day. And then I'm also adding as a bonus 3 additional trainings in regards to managing your classroom. These trainings could be things on like relationship building, navigating disruptive behavior, setting up your roles, etc. All the things you need in order to set up your classroom for success. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure to join the link in the description down below or to join the waitlist there. Thank you so much for joining me. What questions do you have in regards to classroom management? I would love to know. Either comment down below or send me a DM and let me know which one of these you need to hear the most. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I will see you in the next one, teacher bestie. Bye.